Dan Hensler, welcome back to Coached.
Well, thanks very much for having me back.
No,
Appreciate it.
It's the first time we've had a repeat guest, so that's early on in the piece, but it's good. It's good to have you back, mate.
It's good to be the first.
Yeah, it's always good to be the first. I think off the back of our previous conversation, we jokingly said at the end we could easily do a part two. Based on some feedback and the conversations we had off the back of it, it just made sense to do a part two. So here we are with a part two. We've got even some Q&A, so we'll see where it sort of takes us today.
Absolutely.
But I think off the back of last time, I personally took a lot out of it. I think just as a bit of a recap and refresh for those that maybe haven't had a chance to listen to the part one yet. For me, there was a couple of key topics there. It was around being able to control yourself in certain situations, the wearing the mask or, identifying or de-identifying yourself within certain situations was another big one for me. And then off the back of that, there was a heap of stuff that we didn't get a touch on. So I'd love just to start at the top, and on the way out, you were kind enough to give me a copy of your book. And I jokingly said there before we jumped on, my partner had it all Christmas break and wouldn't let me touch it. And genuinely, that was true. And then she took it into work and I also didn't get a chance to touch it. So for those that are listening, you can get the book, obviously, the physical copy, or as I discovered later on, you've also got it on Spotify. So anyone that's got Spotify, you can just jump on and listen to it. It's got your beautiful tones
I was going to say,
going through.
If you can't get enough of my dulcet tones, jump on Spotify for 6.5 hours or whatever it is.
I think it was for 5 hours or something. 2 times speed, it's only half the way. But you can jump on Spotify, and it's also, it's free, but, otherwise, support, buy it from the bookstore. But I think, as I said to you before, about 3/4 of the way through. And there was a couple of things that really stood out to me, but there was one quote in particular, and it really resonated with me, and probably a bit of I don't know, that's kind of, how it slaps you in the face a little bit. And it was the quote, it's simply, high performance is not about being perfect. And I don't know, for me, I always feel like that perfectionism or trying to be perfect or display that you're doing perfect at all times. Again, probably directly reflecting that in what I do in regards to coaching, something like this as well. It's always about being perfect, but nothing's ever perfect. Things pop up, things come along the way, and I think even with the way we communicate that with our athletes, if we're perfect, then what are we doing it for? Right? There's no point. So I don't know, for you, what does that mean to you? Like when I know in the book you dive in a little bit deeper around what that actually means and a bit more context to it, but for you, like, what does that mean to you? There's that little statement there itself.
I think the striving for perfection is, so striving to be better is different to striving for perfection. It's a different mindset. It's a different way of being. Because if I'm striving for perfect, it's kind of like, I think what differentiates someone who is striving for let's start that bit again. I think well, that's good, eh? Not perfect.
There we go.
But I think the thing that differentiates someone who's striving for perfection versus someone who's just striving to be better or has that growth mindset is their relationship with failure. So if I'm striving for perfection, then my relationship with failure is that essentially I don't want a relationship with failure, right? I don't want it to come into my my lexicon. Whereas if I have a growth mindset, I understand that failure, and I'm not talking about like critical failures on the biggest of stages. I'm talking about just not quite meeting the mark here or there, or deliberately pushing myself into an environment where I am not as competent as I might be, right? So to find out what that next edge is. And, too many people think of high performance as you can't make mistakes. And I think of it completely differently. I say, no. A high performer is the one who's able to respond to making mistakes. So sport is predicated on people making mistakes. If nobody made mistakes, I think we touched on this in our last episode, then sport would be really boring because you'd know who was going to win based on who's the fastest, who's the best. Like we have the metrics that show us this.
And the refs wouldn't cop any abuse.
Refs wouldn't cop any abuse. But seriously, right? It would just be so formulaic. So it's predicated on who handles the ability there to manage, ups and downs throughout a season or throughout an event or in the moment. So I'll always challenge a coach, we've got to be perfect. No, we don't. Maybe it'll be nice in this moment to be perfect, but in many sports which are kind of open-ended, what's perfection anyway? Because if we're saying perfection is just not making mistakes, then I can help an athlete make no mistakes simply by saying, don't do anything, mate. Just cruise through the game, right? Don't call for the ball. You won't make any mistakes. So really, as I said, it's about this idea of just creating a relationship with setbacks, with failures, which means that I learn from them and I grow from them. And that's really tied in with the idea then of pressure, because if perfection is the goal, then already the pressure is almost insurmountable, right? Because I'm not in control of whether it's going to be perfect or not. There are so many variables which come to that, and ultimately it's unobtainable. That's the bottom line. You're setting yourself an expectation which is ultimately unobtainable.
I think the other part, which was probably farther into the book, around like being in an environment that's safe to fail as well.
Yeah.
And I think there was some good examples there around, it was more so organizational structures, but also in the team setting as well. Like it's okay to fail or not necessarily hit the nail on the head, but having the safety net and the people around you that it's not frowned upon as such. It's okay, right? Talk us through that. Like you've got some of the best players in the world. We've gone through this in the previous episode. Like they make mistakes. How do they respond in a team setting? And what's the environment like around them once those sort of mistakes are made?
So I think first of all, just framing the book. So the book is predominantly a leadership book, right? So it's predominantly aimed at sort of like your corporate type leaders. There's stories from sport to illustrate some points, but a lot of the concepts are kind of saying, okay, what does this look like in a typical 9-to-5 kind of work environment? What you're alluding to there is, an environment where it's okay, or it's safe to admit mistakes. It's safe to not get things 100% right. That concept that we're referring to is a concept called psychological safety, which is the belief that no one will be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or making mistakes, right? And so it's one thing for me to walk in, let's say I moved from one team to another, or walked from one organization to another. And in my previous organization, it was fine. You could come up with a crazy idea. You could have a go at something, and it doesn't come off, but you'd put your hand up, you'd talk about it, you'd share the learnings, and that's how that environment operated, right? But you move across town, or you move across the league to another team, and all of a sudden you do that, or you make a mistake, and it's put up on the big screen, and the coach is making you feel stupid for even trying it. Well, I've not changed, but my behavior will. My behavior will change based on the environment. It suddenly becomes less safe to have a go at something and it not come off because of how I'm going to be made to feel about it. And so what we talk a lot about in high performing environments is we don't want you to be, we're more concerned if you're afraid to have a go because you're worried about making a mistake than we are about you making the mistake. We can't be afraid to play, we can't be afraid to take the shot. And I think there's any number of examples of the highest performers at the highest level that have got versions of that. There's Instagram memes made up about them. Netflix captures, Michael Jordan talking about, why would I be worried about missing a shot I've not even taken yet, and just off the cuff stuff. He's not thought about that sentence necessarily. It just comes off because that's who he is. It's like, why am I going to worry about making mistakes? Let's have a go at it. So, which is interesting, right? Because Jordan, of course, did continually strive outwardly, perhaps, for we've got to be perfect, we've got to be this, we've got to be that. But I think there's some nuance in the way that went about. So thinking about the environment, the coaching staff, the senior players, whether that's in a sporting team or a corporate team, how do we set up the environment where people can have a go? And
the one thing that no one could ever question Jordan on, and probably why anyone from the casual fan of basketball all the way through to, say, Phil Jackson being the head coach, to give him that final shot, was they would never question, has he done the preparation leading up to that moment? So, had he just not turned up to training for 6 months like Dennis Rodman and go to WWE and, do whatever else, and then Rodman took the big shot, maybe a little bit different scenario, but Jordan was always able to do that.
And I think, again, that's the culture piece, that's the environment piece, understanding and knowing where people are at and what they've done. That's trust, right? That's understanding your teammates. And interestingly, we're sort of doing a work in different spaces where we're sort of getting players to talk about, so if I do make a mistake, what do I need in that moment from my teammates?
So like tap on the bum or
whatever
lift your
it
head
is,
up.
yeah, or maybe I
it is.
need the ball straight away, get me back in the game.
Yeah.
And that might be outside of the system,
Yeah.
but we know that in that moment, that's what that player needs in order to get them back into the game as quickly as possible. So we work to do that.
And how, because that makes heaps of sense. In a complex dynamic game, like let's say like rugby league, how do you try to do that based on position? Is that they then put themselves, you know, let's just use Nathan Cleary as an example because it's just nice and simple. He's a halfback, so he gets his hand on the ball a lot. Yeah. Is that just, you know, that next set, he just needs to get his hand on the ball twice, you know, drop someone under, maybe play out the back or take a run or something like that? Is that how it is? Because I've heard that, me personally, my coach used to always say to me, if you don't have a run in the first 2 sets as a half or get into some contact, you're in for a bad game. Right. Basically, that was his KPI for me, was that's your key focus. Yeah. And he's probably a bit of truth in that. Yeah. Right? Is that kind of like the similar sort of thing?
It's having, so whatever it is for Nath or whatever it is for any other player, it's got to be something that they're in 100% control of and can activate when it needs to be activated. So when I say 100% in control of, like, I'm saying, okay, I need this to happen, and other teammates can contribute to that. In a case where, because it might not be appropriate that what we come up with is the thing. So then, okay, so if it's not that, what is it? So I'll give you an example with players running on the field on a debut, for argument's sake, right? Getting them to do something that they're 100% in control of as soon as possible is key. Now, for some of them, it might not be getting the ball because of the position or the state of the game. It might not be making a tackle because no one comes down their side. So it could be more, okay, well, I'm 100% in control of communicating with my outside man, and I'm going to say this, or I could go over and touch the corner flag, or I'm going to do something which I'll mentally rehearse. I'll put myself in that situation, and I'm just going to do it to have a sense of, okay, I'm in the game. I'm not waiting for something to happen here. In the ideal sense, I think, your coach, if it's right for you, in the ideal sense, it would be really game specific, but sport is, imagine you're a goalkeeper in soccer, right? Oh yeah, I want to have a good catch. Well, what happens if you spend half the time, the ball's up the other end of the field? You can't do that. So you need to be doing something else to get into the game rather than just waiting for it. And again, that's a lot to do with understanding agency, efficacy, control, and doing something. Ideally game specific, but if not, something else that you're in control of.
Wasn't going to go there today, but I think it makes perfect sense off the back of it. And this was something that came up a lot just in conversation around like some of the things that people took a lot away from the last episode was like the rituals and like the pre-game, not necessarily superstitions, but pre-game things that people do. Yeah. And it wasn't necessarily like, you have to have your left boot on before your right boot and, it's like, it really related to when we spoke about Kobe crossing the court and he went from Kobe Bryant to the Black Mamba, and we mentioned Sasha Fierce, Beyonce on stage, like that really got a lot of people's eyes open, and that was a lot of feedback for me personally anyway. So to go there a little bit, like let's use NBA because I love basketball. I know you know a bit about basketball as well. You look at Steph Curry when he runs on the court to start the game. He runs down from one end of the court, back to the other, does his little thing at the back of the court. Kevin Garnett used to smack his head on the post. Dwayne Wade used to do pull-ups in the ring. Yeah. Like everyone had their own sort of like moment, like you mentioned there before. They could 100% control because that court, whether they're in Miami, Boston, Madison Square Garden, it's going to be the exact same. Yep. Talk to us about pre-game rituals or those sort of moments, or maybe even define the difference between the two for us.
The difference between rituals and superstitions.
Yeah. And then how athletes that if they do have, maybe they're type A and they do have a healthy habit of it needs to be done this way every single time, whether I am in Miami, here or Sydney versus Melbourne. Yeah. And if things don't go their way, what then happens?
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I think there's a lot in here, right? So, so I frame it as I talk about predictable routines, right, versus superstition. So superstition could also be a predictable routine, but there's this added element of if it's a superstition, if I don't do it, then immediately I'm on the back foot, right? It's like, oh shit, I can't do what I need to do. And I've had examples, of really, really good players who, for example, if they were traveling and they weren't able to have the usual smoothie that they would have pre-game, would really knock them, would really throw them, which I couldn't believe I was actually hearing at the time, but obviously I can believe I'm hearing it, but it's just really interesting, like the most simplest of things, that can just knock someone. And so superstitions tend to be quite fragile, right? We wear one pair of undies in a game, we play really well, so that's now the pair of undies. I mean, and if we lose them, so I try and steer clear of talking about superstitions. What I talk about is predictable routines, which are helpful. And what I'd like to do is try and backward map from the kickoff or the tip off or whatever it might be. If we work backwards from that, what are things which in your ideal scenario you would prefer to be able to do, right? And so 2 minutes before kickoff, what would you prefer to be able to do? Right, it's bum, 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 sweet. Okay, let's take it 10 minutes, bum, bum, bum. Some of it's now managed for me because we're doing the team warm-up. Okay, let's take it further back, let's take it further back, let's take it further back. And what we're trying to suggest is that in the ideal world, your predictable routine will play out as it does, right? But we're also trying to recognize that there's strength or resilience built into this routine. So if something does drop, it's okay, because the next domino is still standing up. Like, it's not everything's gone. If I can just get to here, then I can click in and, whatever it might be. I can do my prayer, or I can do my mindfulness bit, or I can do my particular dynamic stretching. I need to, whatever, right? But the point is, we're being quite deliberate about what that is. So the really most recent example I've got of this, I work with a lad who plays for the Socceroos. And ahead of, I could get this wrong, but I think it was ahead of the last game they played, I'm going to say Japan, but I'm not entirely sure. But it was certainly just in that last international block. The bus got stuck in traffic going to the game. And I mean, it was proper traffic. Like, the bus wasn't moving at all. To the point where once they got to the ground, there wasn't actually time for them to do the warm-up. And
sports scientists is having conniption on the bus, yeah.
Yes, and they're ringing, they're trying to get, for whatever reason, the governing body wasn't going to move the kick, they couldn't push it back or whatever. And it was really interesting to chat with the player I'm working with, because I was saying, surely, like, it's one thing, he's not the smoothie guy, right? But I'd shared with him the smoothie. It's one thing to not be able to have your smoothie 3 hours before kickoff, right? But that must have rattled you. And he went, to be honest, not really. Because I knew we were going to get there in time for me to do my little 15-minute prep that he does prior to kickoff. And he said, it was a classic example. We can't control the traffic, so it was just making sure that there was the nervous energy or all that, the amount of stuff wasted. Oh, what if we do this? Can we do that? Oh, we're not going to be that. Just everyone was pretty chilled, he said, on the bus, but him specifically, he was able just to understand, well, I can't do anything about the traffic, but what I can control is, as soon as I'm in there, and the calculations was like 15 minutes, as soon as I'm in there, I'm just going to lock into that, and what will be, will be. And a lot of the athletes that I think are able to sort of have that flexibility and adaptability, kind of have that whole, the bus ride isn't going to determine whether we play well or not. I've been playing this game for 20 years, right? I've got a lot of experience here. Yeah, I know the sports scientists have got, but I know there's routines which are useful, right? Don't get me wrong. But it's a bit like, the same thing that people will talk about confident, I've had a bad week. And as we touched on this last time.
Zoom out.
Yeah, zoom out. Yeah, you might have had a bad week, but you've had a hell of a career.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be here if you'd not had a hell of a career. You've got a lot of experience, a lot of reps, a lot of, currency in the bank here that you can withdraw. So it's about, as I said, sort of, if you've got a predictable routine that allows you to, in the ideal world, you do X, Y, Z, boom. But in the real world, sometimes you only get to do X and Z. But they're so, useful, for want of a better word, that the absence of one of them isn't as big a deal. Yeah, it's not a superstition where it says, well, if I don't, then I can't, that's superstition. Or if I do this, then it's bad luck. And a predictable routine is just saying, okay, well, ideally, I'll do this, I'll do this, and I'll do this. And it just gets repped over and over and over again without any attachment to the magic of
above or
below, or
exactly,
whatever, right? Yeah.
Nah, awesome breakdown. I think that's very helpful for athletes, and so they can picture and break that down between what they will probably do. We often talk about game day. Do you ever bring any of that purposeful practice, into training as well? So then that eliminates some of that game day anxiety. Is that something that you speak to your athletes about as well?
What do you mean by that? Like prepping for game day?
Yeah. So we get a captain's run. We know our captain run's going to be, let's say, 11 a.m. on Friday. We play, 4 p.m. Sunday, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Do you ever say to them, okay, well, when you're coming into game day, you might have your anxiety's really high, your stress is really high, you're starting to redline a little bit. So you've got your plan here to follow, which is obviously designed to help minimize some of that effectiveness, put you in the moment, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Do you ever go, okay, well, maybe let's practice that before we actually do it, like we do with our training? So do we ever try, obviously it might be condensed version, or maybe just take 3 of those 6 elements before training and go, okay, let's try that before you train. How do you feel at training when there's no media there, there's no 50,000 fans screaming at you? Do you ever try that with the athletes as well?
So the short answer is yes. So we not all the time, but there'll be certain times during a season or in pre-season where you just have the opportunity to be able to do things like that. So for example, we might do a whole visualization sort of session prior to training, just to really try and dial in certain focus or get them experiencing certain feelings before they then go and execute. What we often do is we'll often get them to plan their time away from training. So training, as you know, in every high performance environment is very carefully managed. Nothing's left to chance, doing this. But then they go and have a day off, or they have the afternoon off, or they have captain's run at 11 o'clock, as you say, and then they've got almost 24 hours after that or more before kick-off. So then we talk about, okay, well, how are you going to manage that time? How are you going to block out time for certain things to focus on? So, it's probably, one of the things we have trained, in different environments is like training certain things. Like we've trained like a half time. We've trained a pre-game scenario. So we kind of said, this is what to expect. With debutants, for example, we often do a lot of visualization with them. We get people to, talk about what they can expect, because everything they think they're going to expect, it's, they see it, but it's more of that emotional, it's that overwhelm. It's the seeing everyone who's surprised them from their hometown in the crowd, it's all that kind of stuff. So so we'll definitely do visualization on that kind of stuff. We do very deliberate time blocking for days off or in between captain's run game days. And I'd say, and then there could be specific elements of the day that we will train, i.e. halftime.
I think very interesting, rolling off the back of that, around professional athletes, time is so well managed, right? Like they're always doing something and there's very little downtime. So 2 parts to that. One, I'm reading/listening to a book at the moment by Big Sean. He's a rapper, but very self-conscious, bit of the inner work kind of off the back. You're probably a bit more spiritual, right? Very interesting around how he's implemented these different strategies and techniques to sort of get through what he's done. Is a bit wooey, you'll have your studio set up a certain way based on his chakras, trains a certain way. Like he's made everything based on this sort of a being around what he wants to be, right? Rugby league athletes, obviously probably not to that level, but busy all the time. He's like, as an example, I meditate for 15 minutes a day. I, take my cold shower a day. And it's like, yep, you maybe can, but we've got 24 hours a day. Everyone has 24 hours in a day. Listening back to the previous episode, we didn't really give a whole lot of strategies, which is great, because I think that was probably good for a conceptual level. And I know that some people will listen and go, yeah, but that's easy to say when they've got so much time allocated
Yeah.
towards doing that,
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
you know, they're a celebrity and they don't have to be their 9 to 5 job.
Yeah, you can pay for your personal barista and chef and
Yeah.
whatnot. Yeah, yeah.
So when you
yeah.
when you hear that, that's just a resistance, right? Sometimes there's genuine reasons. Also, sometimes it's not a priority, which is sweet. You just got to identify what it is. I myself, as of late, have tried to embody some of these things, and you know, today, for example, up at 5 o'clock on the field, literally straight to here, back to back to back. I would love to sit down and take 5 minutes just to do a meditation or something like that.
Yeah.
It's pretty hard to do.
Yep.
When you're hearing stuff like that with athletes and they go, I'm all for it, Dan, but like, where am I going to fit this in?
Yeah.
Where do you break that down and how do you start to look at that?
Yeah. So okay. So the athletes have got time, right? So I think maybe let's think about this for the average punter listening to or watching the podcast. It's like because every professional athlete will have time for that, right? So then it does become a case of how important is it to you, or do you just feel like you're being compelled to do this and you can't really be bothered? So I'll just use the age-old excuse of I don't have time, right? Because no one's got time, so everyone goes, yeah, no, we're all really busy, right? So it's just a bit of a cop-out, right? So let's talk about the people who genuinely don't have it. They don't have every second day or second half day kind of to themselves, or
having someone like you available to pop in and provide services.
Right, okay, yeah. So for me, it's about if we use your example, today you're doing a lot. You're up, do, right? And this might sound a bit out there, right? But what I like to have people think about is rather than what are you going to do today? How are you going to be today? Right? So I'll give you my example, right? So when I'm thinking, what I'm trying to be, no matter how busy I am, what I'm trying to be is calm, present, and flexible, right? So that works on like a macro level. I can zoom out and go, okay, over the last week, how did I track with that? Right? How flexible was I this week, or was it just now? So there was no flexibility because I was so locked in. It was like bang, 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 back to back. How present was I with people? Well, probably not, because I had so many emails to get to, and even though I was in a conversation, I was thinking about something else. Or worst case scenario, I was actually on my phone whilst with someone else. And how calm was I? Well, no, I've got a bit uptight about this, that, or the other, right? So that's like being able to zoom out. And then you're able to get really micro. And so for something like right now, right here, right now, how calm am I? How present am I with you talking about this? How flexible am I to be able to respond, hopefully well-ish, to some of the questions that, we don't know. I don't know what you're about to throw at me, and that's how I want to be, right? And that to me is more important than what I do. That's my philosophy. That way of being, along with a few other things that I've done. You remember last time we were talking about I am what I do,
yeah,
and splitting the I am and what I do. So since then, I've
really added another part to it, have you?
Well, I've really gone in on it and sort of really explored it, and also shared it with all the people I'm working with to get them to sort of kind of think about it themselves. And it's like, when you get that right.
The I am part?
When you get the I am part right, like you understand, I'll show you about it. I am always learning, right? I am people first, right? I am interested in results, but I'm focused on the manner of them. So I'm interested, but I'm more focused on that. My values, belonging and excellence. I'm committed to helping people thrive professionally, personally. I'm calm, present, flexible, right? When I am that, whatever I'm doing, coaching, podcasting, presenting online, presenting on stage to 1,000 people, parenting, being a husband, when I am that, I'm good. No matter what domain you find me in, I'm good. The problem I have is when I focus on what I'm doing, right? And it all becomes about doing, and I start losing track of that. So when I'm focusing on doing of the running the business, I can become pretty uncalm, because it's all about the bills, the numbers, have we got enough clients coming in, this, that, and the other. If I'm all about the coaching work, I can sometimes be a little less present in another domain of my life with my kids or whatever it might be, right? So, and again, just to be clear, it's not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing. I'm just saying it's a good frame of reference for me to have. I know that when I am, I do well.
I think this flows beautifully, like, and I don't want to interrupt you, but it just makes so much sense here. I'm going to selfishly steal the spotlight again and say, me personally, when I'm busy, when I'm doing lots of things, you're kind of in that flow state and you get more things done.
Yep.
And I feel that it's kind of like a battery. The more that goes on, it gets charged.
Yep.
And at some point, obviously, you need to take a break. But do you find that with your high performers, that when they're on, they're like really, really, really on, and like and they get that domino effect and it just keeps smashing? Is that a thing? And then is that a positive or a negative? Because eventually, you probably have to stop, and then does that kill the whole momentum? You have to start again. Like, where does that look for you?
So, I think just to sort of try and join a few dots there. So what I'm suggesting is that in reality, what I should have when I'm saying I am striving to be these things, right? That's what my aim is, to be these things. And because life happens and I'm human, I probably don't tick all those boxes on any one given day, but it's a frame of reference. It's like a compass, right? Whereas when I'm focusing on what I'm doing, that tends to be more like goal oriented, and goals I sort of think of like more like a map, right? So, and by definition, a map is, well, it's written, it's set in stone, it is what it is, and I've just got to do this, to do this, to do this, to do this, and there's not as much. If I'm just following a map, right, it's not as mindful. So you think about Google Maps, right? When you're driving in your car, and if you're driving somewhere for the first time, right, with a map on Google, and then you had to switch the map off and drive again, a lot of people have got no idea. It's like if you're a passenger in a car, right? You don't actually know the journey. Whereas if you've got a compass, right, and you're going, right, I know I need to be heading north, or whatever direction, right? The point is, you're literally sort of here. You're in the moment looking at the compass, and you have to have more awareness of what's going around you to orientate yourself in that. So the I am is a compass, the to do, what I do is the map, right? And one without the other, you can get by, just to be clear, but it's optimal to have both. So to go to your point, I would suggest that the idea of, I'm just busy and I'm in flow. The only reason you get into flow is because what you're doing is so nicely aligned with who you are. If you're just being asked to do loads of stuff which is actually at odds with, or you're asked to do it in a way that's at odds with who you are, you won't get into flow. So if I'm working with a team and I don't feel a sense of belonging, like if I'm the guy that no one really wants to spend any time with, they're not interested in what I'm doing, I'm just there because it seems to be the new thing that teams have got and whatnot, or like in the corporate world, like the boss has listened to a podcast, he thinks it's great, he brings you in and everyone's sitting there. You can't get into flow. I can't, because it's such a clash of my values. If I'm working with someone, my other core value is excellence. If I'm working with people, I can be doing all the work, but if they're not buying in, I'm not going to get into flow. So that's the state of flow. Typically, is when our values align. We've got agency, volition. We're good at what we do. There's meaning and purpose and all that kind of stuff. The potential downside of that is we can get so into that we do lose track of other important metrics. For example, other relationships in our life. We've become so singular focused on this, or in some cases our own well-being. Like I wouldn't use the word burnout, because burnout means we're sort of being pulled away from our values as much as we are fatigued and tired, but we can certainly get tired. We can run ourselves into the ground doing things we love. So it's an interesting tension and balance, because that's where I'm sort of saying that having the compass, which has things like, if I'm going to be present and flexible and calm, I know I also need recovery time in there to be able to do that. And there are times, this is one of those times, the start of a year, where it doesn't feel like there's much of that at the moment. It's pretty much full on. It's go, go, go. But what I do know is when I zoom out and I look at the calendar in the next couple of weeks, we can get back to that rhythm that we're striving for. Yeah, but it's like any game of sport, right? There are moments where we've all just got to go harder.
Dense periods of hard work.
Yeah, and then there's times where we'll just sit back. Not sit back as such, but there's times and ebbs and flows within a game which is a bit like life, I reckon.
Yeah, well, a lot of people now have started to call it like seasons. You've got seasons of hard work and seasons of downtime and arbitrary time. It's not necessarily a season like winter and summer, but that's just an idea of this moment right now or this next couple of weeks is going to be really hard.
Yeah.
But that's all good. Like I've accepted that, I've communicated that, I'm aware of that. There's going to be late nights, there's going to be early mornings, whatever it is. But then on the other side, and that's probably important. The other side part, like you mentioned there, when you zoom out,
it's a carrot. It's being mindful and deliberate about that. And this is the long-winded way of getting back to your first question about for the average punter, it's how mindful and deliberate are you being. It's not how many ice baths are you having a week or what's your how good is your nutrition. No. The question is, with whatever resources you have available at this point in time, how mindful and deliberate are you in using those resources? That's what it's about.
I like it.
I should have said that right at the start.
I was chatting to one of the AFLW girls this morning, and she's big on. She previously listened to a lot of podcasts. She's spoken to me a lot about mental resilience, the mental side of the game, and for her, it was something she wasn't very familiar with, but has started to open up as she's gotten a little bit older, which is really interesting. And then on the contrast, she's in her early 30s, versus I was actually another W girl I was working with this morning, and I asked, I was like, and she's only 19. I was like, out of curiosity, like how much to the mental side of the game have you ever thought about? She's like, what do you mean? I was like, that's all sweet. That's probably answers the question for me. And then, so that gives two polarizing probably viewpoints. Now, obviously N equals one, they're just two individual athletes, and that doesn't necessarily cast a generalized statement across the board, young versus old. But the older one asked me a really good question, and it kind of goes into two parts I'm interested in. Do you think that your mental side of the game gets developed with emotional maturity and with experience? So you can then relate certain situations back to whether that be things happen in your life and or games as one part of it. So, the 19-year-old just simply doesn't have the capacity, like in the gym, they don't have the work capacity yet to be able to squat 100 kilos. You know what I mean? There has to be step-by-step progression to be able to achieve that. So we just can't, even in a team environment, cast that same assumption or that same level across the board. What's your thoughts on that? Like from an emotional maturity standpoint, do you get athletes and you go, you know what, you're probably just not ready for this yet, but here's one thing, just hold on to that for the year. And teams are diverse. You've got old, young, everything in between. What's your sort of there? Because emotional maturity is also subjective. You could be 30 and have the emotional maturity of a 16-year-old. Like that's also very common, especially in rugby league.
Well, especially for me. I think most people who know me would think not emotional, just maturity in general. But look, okay. So I actually have a bit of a phrase that speaks around just the kind of work I do anyway, which is kind of like it's not for everyone until you realise it is. Right. So
it's kind of like insurance. You don't know you have it until you need it.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And in my experience, like I guess it's the same for any kind of behaviour change. Usually, it takes like a critical incident for people to really make a change. Like intellectually, most people would probably go, yeah, it's pretty important. Like when I ask a room, I often do it, if I'm speaking to a big room of emerging athletes or whatever, I'll say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important do you think the mental side of the game is? And I'll sort of give a little bit of, how you handle setbacks, how you handle pressure moments. Out of 10, 9 or 10, 7, 8, 9 or 10. Most hands are up around the 8, 10 out of 10, 9 out of 10. By I say, okay, 8 out of 10, most hands in the room are up. And then I'll say, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how deliberate are you in training that side of your sport in the same way that you are your physical? So by that I mean there's time set aside, you've got dedicated drills, techniques, you're doing reps, you may even have a coach who helps you with that side of things. On a scale of 1 to 10, there's a handful of people in 100 who are doing it. So intellectually, it's not that the people don't know it's important. but there's any number of reasons as to why that people aren't doing it. The first one could just be access. The second one could be resourcing. The third one could be, yeah, it's not really for me though, is it? But I think for a lot of them, they just haven't had a critical moment. Like they might have had constant kind of self-doubt or nerves or whatever, self-limiting beliefs or like that. But
sort of simmers below the surface.
Simmers below the surface, but it's not until they go to something big and they just have a meltdown or they just don't perform anywhere near what they're capable of. Or in a lot of cases, like, a coach suggests something, or what's happened with us, they just hear something at the right time. Like since our last podcast, I've had a couple of athletes reach out. They just heard the podcast at the right time for them, and they've engaged.
And I said this literally this week to a coach I did some upskill with, just literally off the back of this, and I think it's just a perfect point. We're very rarely going to learn new things once we've got some experience. It's just being reframed, being retold, or being told at the right time in a different way.
Yeah.
And it's one of those four things usually. Like very rarely is it something completely new that's just going to blow your mind.
Yeah.
You might know elements of it or whatever else.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, that just makes so much sense.
Yeah. And to your emotional maturity piece, so the actual, okay, is there an age bit to this? I think, so, I used to be a teacher, and a lot of our work as a teacher is, differentiating. So meeting the people where they're at, rather than just saying, hey, here's what you need to learn, go learn it. Good teachers kind of go, okay, here's a bit like the goals thing. Here's where we're aiming for. Here's the map. But you're over here, are you? Okay. Well, let's change the language, give you some scaffolding, whatever. So, to be quite frank, I think under sixes, under sevens, under eights could be doing stuff on this, like a coach. Like if I was coaching an under eights team, for example, I might say, who's your favourite player? Okay, why are they your favourite player? What do they look like? How do they act on the field? Now, unless they've picked a complete tool of a player who carries on like an idiot, right? Let's say they've picked someone, who carries himself well, has had setbacks, bounces back. Okay, cool. How would you describe that person? Okay, why don't you try and play, not do what they do, but try and be, so less of the doing. Why don't you try and be like that today in this game, right? And then we'll talk about afterwards how you were, as opposed to whether we won, lost, scored goals or whatever. How did you manage it when the ref called you for that foul? And I think, as I said, I think by meeting the people where they're at, you can absolutely train. You can get people thinking about this stuff. And obviously, I'm not going to go to a 13-year-old athlete with the same kind of techniques per se that I would with an elite athlete. But I'll absolutely be talking about the same concepts, but just in a different way. I'll be framing it in a different way.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most important thing. It's as you're saying that, I'm just trying to relate it back to coaching, and that was like one of the first things you mentioned in your book as well, which is why, again, it just resonated with me so much, was like the book is designed how I coach. And everything you're saying there is exactly the same as what you would do at a gym. Like you got a 13-year-old kid, of course you're going to get him to, I'll just use the analogy of squatting again. Squat variation, but it's not with a barbell and with 2 times body weight. Like it's a build, it's a process. But
the point is, you're not saying we're not going to do squats because you're 13.
Correct, let's find a variation that's appropriate to you.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the point. I don't think we should be saying, well, you're only 11, so emotional regulation isn't important to you. No, you're
Very
11.
Much so, yeah.
It's really important for you, But we'll do it in a different way. We might not do mental rehearsal with them, but we could do, I'd use the word imagination.
Yeah, same
for
thing,
example.
different meaning.
Yeah, exactly, right? It might not be as long, it might not be as deliberate, but it'll be something around, okay, just imagine that you're scoring this penalty on the weekend. What does it feel like, as opposed to, okay, smell the grass, taking them through the big, longer session. Yeah.
Do you ever walk into a room and go, that guy and girl's got it, that guy and girl doesn't have it, that guy and girl maybe? Like, do you ever walk in a room and you can just literally go bang, bang, bang? Is that something?
In what way? What? What do you mean they've got it?
Yeah, so that's a very good point. Got it as in, like, if you are going through, and I know it's a very complex, wide topic, but you are talking about, an athlete that, not necessarily sticking with that emotional maturity, but like if you're going to give or go through concepts, new ideas, you've got it, like you will be able to pick up on it. Or you walk in, you already got the scaffolding there, if you want to use the word scaffolding. You just need just a little bit of extra mayo on top and you've really got it. You know, you're going to be well composed. I know for you that the mental skill side of the game necessarily may not be as important as the athlete over here. Is that something you're consciously aware of? It's like, you know, certain athletes, if I'm just going to keep using the analogy of the gym, like, they kind of got it enough. Like, what's the point in trying to get an extra 2.5 kilos on your back squat? What are the other areas we can focus on? And it may actually not even be the gym, right? Because it's the holistic development of the athlete, not just my bias or my singular focus.
Yeah.
Does that something you ever look at and go?
I think what I'm really more looking for, rather than whether they've got it or not, is have they got the appetite to explore it? Because I can tell that very, very quickly.
Yeah.
I can tell it from...
What's your go-to signs?
Where they sit, how they sit.
They bring a pen and paper, or the simple stuff, hey?
Just simple things. Like simple things. Are they on time?
Yeah.
When I ask them, what are your expectations? What have you thought about prior to this? Now, just to be clear, there are still lots of people who come in completely cold who do then end up, you know, coming good, for want of a better word, or sort of leaning into it. It's just that they didn't know what they didn't know. So tomorrow, for example, I'm working with an academy group where, you know, they're as good as you can be at that age for their sport, certainly in the state, if not in, you know, around the country. But because they're an academy group and because they're 16, 17, you know, I know that there'll be a chance that, you know, they don't know what they don't know. So I'll walk into that environment. I'll walk into that with a different level of expectations than if I walk into a first grade or an international team. You know, if I've got an international team not rocking up with a journal, that's, to me, is fascinating. Like, I'm like, wow, this is really interesting. Like,
and do you look at that as that's a good problem, or that's maybe a not so good problem? Or,
well, it gives me an immediate thing.
Binary, but
yeah,
you know what I mean?
It gives me an immediate thing to help them with, like the importance of reflection. But it also, you know, again, I guess what I'm really sort of trying to land on is this, that I try and hold off judgment as much as possible. But sometimes it's just obvious. Like I've done, and maybe it's just the nature of what you're also going into. So what I mean by that is, like, when I first started going around to sporting teams in particular, it was it sort of did feel like it's on their calendar. You know, once every month they have to have an external presenter come in. They do something. Sometimes it's on finance, other times it's on respectful relationships. Oh, this week it's mindset. And so these guys or female athletes have just been it's more of a habitual thing. It's on the calendar. And so breaking past that can be a challenge as well. Like, hey, I'm not here to tell you, I'm actually not here to tell you how to do anything. I'm actually here to ask you whether you'd like to do anything in this space. And if you would, here are some ideas and suggestions. It's not me just mandating one way or the other. So what I would say is, when I went into those in that context, certainly I got a few kind of people didn't want to be there, you know, and that's a challenge because they just didn't see the value. They didn't know what the value was going to be leading in, and they just wanted to go, you know. So, but since then, you know, when you're working longer term with people, typically you don't work long term if that's the case, right? So you only work long term where people are actually engaged. So.
Two things off the back of that I really want to ask you. One, what tools do you use then when you walk into a room and maybe it's not something you expect, and, you know, let's say it is an international team and you go on You Beauty, they're going to be all over it, and you walk in and they just don't want to bar you. They're not prepared. So, like, from that standpoint, where do you go? Like, what do you do in that moment yourself? Because jokingly say a lot of the time, like, people that are psychologists or, you know, are in this space quite often need it the most. That's the bit of the saying out there, you know, like you actually overanalyze so many things. Not saying that's you, but that's...
Oh, I'm human,
Correct, so, we all are,
you Yeah, so in that scenario, which to be fair hasn't happened for a long time, and I'll tell you why it hasn't happened for a long time.
That was going to be the second part of the question. Yeah.
Well, okay. Let me start with why it doesn't happen anymore. Is because I'm choosing the I am over the do. So when I first started out, it's like, do you want to come and do this? Yeah, I do, because look who it is. Look at what this will look like on my website. Look at right. And so I was privileging that over the stuff I've said I am. And to be clear, at that point, I probably wasn't that clear on who I am. I've started a business. I need to do the business. So now, the whole piece around belonging and excellence. If I don't get both of those, I'm not working there. So I've started working with the New South Wales Swifts, right? Netball team, super netball. So excellence is a key, right? I mean, they're a professional team. So and they just have that way about them. They're striving for that. But I was doing the first 2 or 3 months of my engagement there was really just getting to know the environment, doing one-on-ones with players and whatnot. And one of the players, and usually I'm doing most of the asking but then I always say, any questions for me? And this one player said, why do you want to work at the Swifts? Which I thought was a really cool question. And I had the answers. I knew exactly why I wanted to play at Swifts, because the very first time I went in, it was their captain's run for their penultimate, if not last game of the season. And they invited me to join the warm-up.
How'd you go?
I went all right. I mean, it wasn't netball, to be fair. There was some version of volleyball, right? But the point was that belonging piece. They didn't know who I was, but I mean, I'd met one of the players previously at an event. I'd met the coach previously, but the players were like, "Hey, Dan, come on over." So I was introduced to the group at the start. Hey, Dan's here, he's thinking about doing some work with us, or we're thinking about doing some work with him. But that was it. And then and then I was just sat there watching. Said, "Whoa, you don't sit there. Come over." And I was like, "Wow." So when you think about belonging, that was cool. And so making business decisions, for want of a better word, off of the values means that now I very rarely will be spending time with people who don't have that desire to actually do the work. How I've managed it in the past ranges from very poorly, i.e. not having a plan B during the session and just muddling my way through and walking off going, far out, I'd never ever want to do that again, through to actually quite good, where basically just posing, realizing that, hang on, there's a bit of a gap to close here. Here I am talking about this, and they're over here. We need to close that. So having some good go-to questions, and that's where the whole out of 10 thing came out of. And it's like, once I say, keep your hand up if you're a 10 out of 10 for how important, or how deliberate you are for training it, and all the hands go down.
There you go.
Isn't that interesting? You're telling me it's the difference, especially at the elite level, it's the difference. Everyone can kick, everyone can pass, everyone can run. Yeah, I say it's a big part of the difference between who can handle those pressure moments or not, So I got better at it, but now as I said, I'm pretty deliberate about not being in rooms where
you might get
we've got that big gap. Yeah, I mean, I like being thrown. Don't get me wrong. I like being challenged on things. That's different.
The gap's just not.
It's a different gap. I like being challenged on things. What I'm saying is, I'm not keen on trying to convince people that this is important. I'm not keen on having to motivate people that this is important. That's not my job.
And that's a good differentiator too, just quite for people to understand, most definitely.
Yeah.
Do you also think, and this is where my head went as well, with maybe why now you've had a lot more success as well. Obviously, it's sort of front of mind for people, the mental skills side of the game with everything that's going around, and for right reasons, so it should be. 2, do you also feel now that you've got quote unquote runs on the board, you've worked with some phenomenal athletes across multitude of sports now, that people just go, your education, obviously, one of your key values was always learning and developing. So obviously, you're always going to keep learning and developing. But I'm just making an arbitrary number. 90% of what you've learned and what your experience is probably going to stay relatively the same. Like they're your core principles.
Yeah.
You might pull and choose and add different pieces to it, but that core principles are pretty much somewhat cemented. Yeah. And whether that was 5 years ago or today, but athletes will buy in because, hey, like, if you do have a presentation, I'm just making an assumption, you chuck it up and here's like 5 athletes you work with. I'd look at that and go, well, I'm not going to be able to argue with that. Like, if it's worked for them, you know,
the big,
it's going to work for me. Like,
well, only if they do the work. That's the point, right? There's like this stuff does not work on.
But does that help them take that first step? Do you think at all?
For sure. I mean,
it breaks down that first wall of, is this guy full of shit or is this guy legit? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, certainly. I mean, credibility is because so it's an interesting one, right? Because I'm not a qualified sports psychologist,
which we chatted about last time.
So I'm not that, right? I'm not that guy. So it's a really interesting one because there are some people for whom that means I don't have any credibility because I'm not a sports psychologist, right? And I've never professed to be. I don't know. What I say is I'm a teacher, right? Who, for a whole series of little serendipitous moments, kind of found himself doing this. Yes, I've done different, courses and certifications and all that kind of jazz. But this whole idea of, sports no, I'm not a sports psychologist. So as I said, some sporting bodies aren't keen on me being involved if I'm not that, because for whatever reason, they see it as not as beneficial, or perhaps it's in competition with, or whatever. What I am is a coach, and what I say is often I'll serve either as a gateway to a sports psych or a clinical psych in some cases. Like, it's well out of my pay grade what you're needing to manage. So it'll sometimes serve as a gateway, but what it always serves as, and that's giving myself a rap, but this is what it always serves as, an amplifier for any messages they have had from a sports psych before.
Yeah.
So it's like, the psych put a graph up about that or said this, but now, because the way I would work, they're able to really contextualize it and make it theirs. Whereas perhaps, and I'm not saying this is the case in every situation, but perhaps it was a somewhat, it was a presentation to the whole team, because often that's how this stuff is often done. It's just the presentation to the team, and maybe there's a one-on-one if they get lucky or whatever. So certainly, then being able to say, look, okay, so I'm not a psych, I'm a coach, and here are some of the people I've worked with, and they have reported that it's helped them in this way or this way or this way. There's no guarantee that it's going to help you, but what I would say is that if you're prepared to do the work, and that's what I said before, like if you're coming to this with a mindset of curiosity and wanting to improve, I would back myself to be able to help people make connections that perhaps they hadn't made before, and create strategies, techniques, ways of being which can help them manage whatever it is they're trying to manage, whether that's in the corporate world or sporting world.
And I think that differentiator probably, as much as it may work against you, works for you, right?
It might do, because I think we probably touched on this last time. I do think, and this is not, I don't agree with this sentiment whatsoever, but I do think that there's still something of a bit of a stigma around the idea of a sports psych. It's just the word psychologist, and it's like I don't think there should be. I've got the utmost respect for sports psychs.
To go from nothing to mental skills to sports psych is like that bridging gap in the middle.
And you frame it as a skill.
Yeah,
athletes get skills. It's I can train this. Okay, whereas I do think, and maybe in some environments, they've not done enough education around a sports psych versus clinical psych type situation. So, it's, but sure, having good players say it's helps.
Definitely. One thing we spoke about off air last time, because I was very curious about your thoughts on it, and I really want to touch on it today, is you're at the Swifts now, you're at the Panthers.
Yeah.
two very different organisations, top down. But obviously, you now got male athletes and you've got female athletes.
Yeah.
And I think my personal experience, I'll tell you what I think in a sentence, because I was thinking about this on the way here, how to summarise it as brief and succinct as possible. I believe with female athletes as a coach, you have their trust till you lose it. With male athletes, you have to build trust. That's my simple way of doing it. Sorry, I have muddled that up. With male athletes, I tried to nail it so quick. Let's start again.
That was good though.
With male athletes, you have their trust until you lose it.
Right.
With female athletes, you need to build their trust. Right?
Okay.
That is my quick, succinct version of that.
Yeah.
So for a bloke, until you do something that goes against him, I trust you.
Yeah.
Again, generalization. But with female athletes, it's, okay, show me that you care, show me this, show me that. You get the proof adds up. Then all of a sudden, to me, I've found that with female athletes, especially working in the private space, if a female athlete moves on, whether they go to a different club or they do something else, it generally feels like a breakup because there's so much emotional investment in it. That's been my opinion, my quick Cliff Note version.
Yeah.
Your shorter experience now with the Swiss, you've obviously worked with female clients in the past. What's your opinion on that?
How do you? Yeah, I mean, it's. So I've heard a few different versions of what you've said.
Obviously not as succinct and beautiful as that.
Obviously not. I mean, that's an Instagram post right there. But one version I heard, which I think there's in my experience sort of mirrors this a little bit, is that if I go into a room, let's say I'm doing something on like the inner critic, right? Or I'm doing something on imposter syndrome. If I go into a room full of male athletes, very generally speaking, the vibe is, oh yeah, they're listening, go, oh yeah, there's guys in here who struggle with this, right? So the idea is that the person that, this is, other people deal with this. Whereas in a female environment, everyone's listening going, oh my God, he's talking about me, right? Now again, I'm not saying that that's true, but I've had a few different coaches sort of share that approach to thinking about, so what does that mean when we're giving constructive feedback? What does that mean when we're dealing with setbacks? And I think, without being in any way stereotypical about it, but maybe it is stereotypical, I don't know, but I'm just basing it on my experience. What I've found at the Swifts and with other female athletes is that from the get-go, they actually are able to be a bit more reflective, or they certainly seem to be open to being a bit more reflective on the whole identity piece, on the whole, what you might even call the softer side of performance, which I actually feel is the foundation of performance. Whereas, and again, massive generalization, but I'm only speaking from my experience, the male athletes it has to be more performance-based to start with. We'll get to this, we'll get to the other bit
you later. Opposite ends of the spectrum
kind
a little bit?
But almost naturally, it's sort of, it's
seesaw effect, right?
Yeah. Maybe, now, to be clear, maybe that's because of how maybe that's my biases coming through in how I'm framing the session. I don't know. But certainly in my experience, that tends to, they're the main ones. Like the male athletes straight away need to know the performance benefit, whereas the female athlete tends to be more about what the identity piece, as I might frame it, that softer side stuff, and then we'll get to okay, now we can take this to the core or to the whatever environment.
I couldn't agree more. Like even just taking it back from like a layer deeper in my explanation. Male athletes just want to know why. Why is that going to help? Great, I can do that. That's kind of the end of it. Yeah. With the female athletes, you kind of like to take them through the journey a little bit more, the emotional side of it. And you know what? I find that more often than not, if you just ask them, what are you up to on the weekend? Oh, I'm going to go see my friend who is up from Brisbane, or down from Brisbane, depending on where you're at. Down from Brisbane for the weekend, blah, 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 we're doing this and this. Monday comes around. Hey, how was when you caught up with, your friend? Oh, yeah, it was really, really good. And all of a sudden, now you've got them. Like, it's that sort of side of it. Not saying that guys don't care that you invest in what they do, but for females, that is so much more valuable than anything else. Because then all of a sudden, they're like, oh, he really cares. She really cares. That care factor is just amplified in my experience. I don't know. I was really curious from your perspective, and I think where people get it wrong is where they say there is no difference. And I've had that experience with coaches before. They've gone in, well, team's a team. Team dynamics are not a team dynamic. Male team versus male team is different. Female team to female team is different.
Athlete to athlete is different as well.
There you go.
Right? So that's what I would say. It's the difference is, so a different way of thinking about this could be to say that there's more difference between athletes of the same gender as there are across the genders. Is that right?
That does make sense,
There's more difference between individual female athletes than there are between a whole heap of female athletes and a whole heap of male athletes. And to be honest, that goes back to that idea of differentiation again, where, I am noticing there are differences between the two environments that I spend most of my time in the sporting sense. There are. But there are also differences between the playing groups,
within that.
Yeah, within that. And I think that having that idea of meeting our athletes wherever they're at is super important, and trying actually to go in with as open a mind and open, book of techniques to try and make those connections as possible, for sure.
Wrapping up, because we've gotten halfway through the questions again, so part 3 might be on the cards. I think this time of year is really important for a lot of athletes, for our field-based athletes. They're going back into trial games if they're playing junior reps. I know your son had a game on the weekend. Junior reps are on, they'll be just around the corner. The Panthers are travelling. Are you going to Vegas?
I'm not going to Vegas,
what a shame.
No,
What a shame. Panthers going over for round 1. AFL round 0 is literally around the corner. It's all happening. Clubland goes back in juniors and seniors as well. Pre-season can be a great time because it can really build a good foundation and a good base. Also, I know for a lot of athletes, especially if they're first, second year, third year players, they get to now and they're actually fucking cooked. They're like, I'm done. I'm buggered. This hasn't even started yet. You got 26 rounds. What do you say to athletes now if they're starting to maybe show, whether that be subjectively, i.e., you're asking, how are you doing? I'm tired. Ask them, how you going, mate? Tired. You start to see that subjectiveness, or their performance just starts to decrease. Just a little freshen up, or maybe just that freshen up approach. How do you just give them a little spark again in knowing that, it's a big season, but we're here. What's your approach there?
Yeah, I think that predominantly, actually, my approach would be first and foremost to check in with the physical staff, like the S&Cs and the physios or whoever, to try and get the lay of the land. So is this a physical thing, or is it a mental fatigue thing? And because obviously there's different approaches. So if it is a physical thing, then whatever that looks like, break or reduce
deload,
whatever. You know that far better than me. If it's a mental fatigue thing, then I would I talk a lot about this idea of being able to switch off, because if you don't switch off, then you're always on, and if we're always on, then you are just going to grind into nothing, right? So and again, this kind of ties back into the whole stuff around who you want to be, and what other environments and other canvases where you get to express who you are. So if you've only got the sport and that's literally it, then it's really hard to switch off, because if I switch off, then I feel like I'm not doing or being anything. So it's like saying, okay, well, let's find other environments that you get to be yourself in, hobbies, relationships, you name it.
And can I ask a question? Sorry to cut you off in your flow. Let's say, for example, I'm a professional athlete. Let's say your hobby is yoga or Pilates. That's almost adjacent to what you do. Is that a good hobby, or would you rather say, hey, let's do something completely, let's go do painting. Let's go do clay work. I'm just making up something very, very random, very different. Is that better, do you think, than having something slightly adjacent? Because at the end of the day, you might be doing yoga and you're like, okay, this is going to increase my hamstring flexibility, which, then all of a sudden, okay, I'm doing something that is deemed right or better for me, but I'm still thinking about my sport, versus clay, unless you're making AFL balls or rugby league balls or something like that, because you're a complete weirdo, you're kind of really disconnecting or disassociating from that identity. Thoughts?
I come back to this question, like, is this helping? Is this serving you? Is this helping or harming? So if it's yoga, and I say, is it helping? And I go, yeah, I completely switch off. I just follow the yogi and I'm doing this and transport it to somewhere completely different. I do my mindfulness at the end of it and I come out and I feel $1 million. Sweet, keep doing yoga. Play on, yeah. But if it's like, yeah, I'm doing it to try and get a break, but I don't think I can, then, that's when it becomes the issue. So again, it's like just getting to know them and getting them to know themselves as much as anything. Oh, I thought this would help, but it turns out it doesn't. Having different places where they get to be them, and then saying, okay, and does this help? Because it's no good having, like you say, something that clay work.
I don't know where clay come from, but
let's say clay. But they're just making AFL balls all the time, and I mean, maybe that helps. I don't know, but my point being, the question is, does it help you or not? Because if you go and do your hobbies and then you come back and you're just as cooked from doing your hobbies as you would have been if you'd done a field session, then maybe we need to rethink those hobbies or how you're spending that time. Because it's a finite resource, right? Our energy and our focus. So we need to be mindful and deliberate about that. So if let's say you address that, and then it could just be, let's realign with our goals and what we said was important, and again, who you want to be, and it's just unpicking that. But understanding that we need to switch off, because if you're always on, well, you can't switch on when it really counts if you're always on. And you're just going to exhaust yourself.
No, I love it. Just to wrap it up, someone's gotten all this way, and this is awesome. We've spoken about a variety of topics. I can really relate. I just need one or two things to actually take away. And it may not be like an actual practice, but it may be, okay, here's an idea to go and explore just a little bit further. We spoke about like the off switch. That's a nice concept someone can tangibly take away with them to go and explore what that means. Because I think
I'd give it, okay, so we'll riff on that, right? So go away and think about how you think differently about switching off and recharging, because they're two different things, but we get them mixed up. So what I mean by that is sometimes people, the best way we can recharge is obviously sleep, right? But a lot of the time, what it takes to recharge, other than, recover, let's say recover sleep, to recharge typically requires some sort of intentionality, right? So people will recharge, they'll tell me, for example, by going out and meeting friends. So you don't go out and meet friends by accident. Right, you have to be intentional. Some people talk about, I recharge by going to the gym. Physically, it's tiring, but afterwards, I've got that real sense of recharge, ready to go. No one ends up at the gym by accident, right? But then other people say, I just like to chill out and watch Netflix with a glass of wine, right? The problem with that is that's typically quite passive, because you think you're going to watch one Netflix episode, but you end up watching 3, and the glass becomes a bottle. And so that's more of a switch off, right? I'll switch off there, and I'll just mindlessly now just start doing it. And the problem with that, of course, is that those things which helping us switch off come to the detriment of our ability to recover, sleeping. So so in my world, I switch off by reading fiction. I recharge by reading non-fiction, right? Or listening to, I can't switch off by listening to a podcast. Now, some people might have switched off and fallen asleep listening to me, right? But if I'm listening to a podcast, my mind's popping off. I'm like, I could do this.
You're actively listening, right?
Yeah, if I try and go to sleep after listening to a podcast, I can't, because I'm jotting down all the things, I'm going to do this, So I know that when I'm on holiday, if I want to go away on holiday,
you're taking a fiction
book. I'm taking a fiction book, and it could be the crap. It doesn't matter what it is, but I'm reading fiction. I'm not even taking a biography. I'm not even taking a book on, Djokovic or anything like that, because I know that will get me thinking about stuff. So again, that's that mindful and deliberate piece. The other thing I think would be really, it's so valuable to spend time thinking about it, is if there's anyone sort of listening or watching who does over-subscribe to what they do as a sense of who they are as a person, like, you know, if I'm playing well, then I'm doing well as a human, or people love me more if I'm in the team, or, you know, if I finally get selected or get the contract, then I'll be happy, right? If any of you feeling that, then I think doing the exercise of breaking that I am what I do into I am, and talk about your values, talk about your way of being, how you want to show up, and then think about what you do. That can be a game changer for people, for sure.
No.
And once you've got that married with your ability to switch off at the end of the day and recover at the end of the day, stuff in the middle of the day tends to become a little bit easier, you know. And then, yeah, sure, add your visualization, add your breathing techniques, add your goal setting, whatever it might be. But without those two kind of cornerstones, or whatever you might call them, you know, bookends, anything that happens in the middle is going to be suboptimal.
No, I love it, mate. There's a very good way to finish, and a nice little piece for people to take away if they were jotting their thoughts down.
That's it, yeah.
That's a great way to do it, mate. Thank you again. Best of luck upcoming season with the Panthers. Hopefully we'll chat again very soon, but in the meantime, we'll see how it all goes. So best of luck with the team, and the Swifts aren't too far off.
Start April as well,
Not too far in either, so
happening.
It'll be all happening. So best of luck there, mate.
Cheers, mate. Thanks for having me.
Beautiful.
Cheers.